Have you ever sensed that your dog was trying to warn you about something? Something your own eyes refused to see? I learnt the hard way that when an animal you trust starts acting like every shadow is a threat, you'd better pay attention. My name's Sarah, I'm 26, and this happened to me last summer. I still have no real explanation for what went down, but I can tell you with complete honesty, whatever it was, I don't ever want to be out in the middle of nowhere again. I'm originally from Minneapolis, but I moved to St. Paul with my dog Willow, a 2-year-old black Labrador mix. She's usually pretty quiet, more of a cuddle bug than a watchdog, but she's always been sharp and reactive when she senses something. I had just finished a contract job, and I was looking for a quick way to make some cash, when a friend forwarded me a listing of a house-sitting gig. The job was in southern Minnesota, near the Iowa border, real out in the country territory. The ad offered a solid week of pay for just watching over a quiet property while the owners were out of state. The only catch was that the house was on a big spread of land with multiple buildings, and I was expected to do daily walkthroughs of each structure to check for rodent activity or weather damage. They said I could bring my dog with me for company, which sealed the deal for me. I spoke with the owner, a man named Dolan, over the phone. He was friendly, older sounding, and very clear that all buildings were to be checked, no exceptions. When I arrived on a Sunday afternoon, I was honestly taken aback. The place was beautiful in that kind of eerie, isolated way. The main house was an old 2-story farmhouse surrounded by red and yellow leaves, with a field stretching out on one side and woods on the other. There were 4 other buildings nearby, a small barn, a tool shed, a guest cabin, and a long, low building at the edge of the tree line. The main house was clean and cosy, hardwood floors, big windows, a wood-burning stove, no Wi-Fi, and my phone only got 1 bar of signal if I stood at the end of a long driveway near the main road, so for calls I needed to use the landline connection. It was peaceful, if not a little lonely. I settled in easily enough, taking Willow with me each evening to check the outbuildings. The first 2 days were quiet, peaceful even. I'd do my rounds just before dusk, flashlight in hand, walking the short loop around the property with Willow on a leash. But by the 3rd day, something started to feel off. The strange part was the last building, the long narrow one by the woods. It was padlocked shut from the inside. The latch was locked tight and pressed into the door frame. I tried tugging it open, but it wouldn't budge. The weird thing was that Mr. Dolan had insisted that all buildings should be unlocked and accessible. Even weirder, Willow hated that building. The first night we approached it, she froze about 10 feet away, tail down, ears flat. She let out a low growl and refused to go any closer. I tried to coax her forward, but she actually lay down and wouldn't move up until we turned around. The second night was the same, except this time she started barking at it. Sharp, angry barks like she was warning something inside. By the 3rd night, she was growling before we even got to the trees. I called Mr. Dolan that evening, asking if he was sure that all the buildings should be open. He sounded confused and insisted that none should be locked. I told him I couldn't get into the last one and that it seemed to be locked from the inside. He was quiet for a second and then told me firmly, "You still need to check it. We've had mice in there before. You need to get in." I explained that I'd tried, but it was impossible. He seemed annoyed but let it go after saying that it was only a week after all. That night, I didn't sleep well. Willow kept pacing, stopping at the windows to stare out into the yard. Her ears were flicking like she was listening to something that I couldn't hear. Everything escalated on the 4th night. It started just after sundown. I was in the living room scrolling through some pictures on my phone when Willow suddenly started barking, non-stop. Not playful barking, not alert barking, but full-blown panic barking. I ran to her and tried to calm her down, but she kept charging the front door, her hackles raised. Trusting her instincts, I turned off all the lights in the house and went to the window, pulling back the corner of a curtain just enough to look out. At first I saw nothing, just the yard glowing faintly from the porch light and the dense line of trees beyond it. But then something moved. There was a figure just standing at the edge of the woods, half in shadow. I couldn't see much detail, but it was definitely a person. They were just strolling like they were out for a casual walk. They didn't wave and they didn't approach, they just slowly paced back and forth at the edge of the property, every so often stopping and facing their body completely towards the house, as though staring at me. I crept over to the house phone, not taking my eye off the threat outside, and called Mr. Dolan. It took a while for the call to connect. When he answered, I told him that somebody was on the property. He told me no one should be out there. His voice was suddenly tense. He told me I needed to call the police. I turned to Willow and told her to calm down. When I turned back to the window, the figure was gone. And that's when the power went out. The entire house went black. The heater died, the refrigerator whirred to a stop, the lights and the phone cut off mid-conversation. Complete silence. My heart raced as panic began to set in. Willow let out a high-pitched whimper and bolted from the room. Then came the sound that I'll never forget. A loud snap from outside, followed by what sounded like something dragging along the siding of the house. I heard gravel crunching outside the kitchen, then silence. Seconds later, 3 soft knocks at the front door. Deliberate, patient. I crouched in the corner, heart racing, still clutching my phone. Willow had disappeared somewhere in the house. Then the knocks came again. This time faster, harder. Then a pause. Then a long, slow scrape down the length of the door, like nails or a stick being dragged. I panicked and dove into a pile of laundry behind an ironing board in the corner of the living room. I'd been sorting it earlier. I buried myself under it, hardly breathing. I kept telling myself it was some prank, or a neighbour, or maybe a hunter who was lost in the woods, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Seconds ticked by, then the front door crashed open. It didn't creak, it didn't unlock, it slammed against the wall like somebody had shoulder-checked it. A few seconds of absolute silence followed, before I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy walking boots on hardwood. Slow, measured and deliberate. They walked into the hallway and around the living room, circling slowly. I could hear breathing, not deep or laboured, just steady, calm. I heard the floorboards creak just feet away from where I was hidden. The boots paused, turned, and moved closer. They stopped directly in front of the laundry pile. I held my breath, my entire body tensed, convinced that any movement, any sound would give me away. I genuinely thought I was going to pass out, or even worse, die. Seconds passed. Then abruptly, the footsteps moved away, across the room. And then I heard them climbing the stairs. That was my chance. I crawled from the laundry and crept towards the kitchen where I'd left my keys. My hands were shaking so hard that I dropped them once trying to grab them off the hook. I picked them up and carefully made my way towards the front door. But then I remembered Willow. I couldn't leave without her. I crept outside onto the porch and made my way towards the car, which was parked in the gravel just off the driveway. I unlocked it and opened the door, hoping the sound wouldn't carry. And then I did something incredibly stupid. I called for her, just once. "Willow!" in a loud whisper. A second later, a light turned on in the top floor bedroom, and I saw him, a tall, thin silhouette in the window, staring down at me. He turned away and disappeared from view, presumably heading back towards the stairs. That's when I heard Willow's nails on the hardwood inside the house. She came barreling out of the front door, ears back, eyes wild. Behind her, just for a split second, a man stepped into the doorway. He was pale and thin, wearing dark clothes that didn't look like they belonged to anyone local. His face was mostly in shadow, but I swear, he smiled. I jumped into the driver's seat and held the door open long enough for Willow to dive in behind me, and then I floored it, tearing down the gravel drive without looking back. We drove straight into the night, not stopping until we reached the edge of the next town, where we had cell service. I called Mr. Dolan again and told him everything. He sounded shaken, even scared. He said he'd call the police right away and then hung up. When they arrived, the cops found the house empty. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, no sign anyone had even been in the house at all. They checked the locked building too. This time the door was slightly ajar. Inside they found old furniture, some rusted tools and a nest of dead rodents. Nothing and no one else. I never went back, not even to collect the rest of my pay. Mr. Dolan messaged me a few months later to apologise for what happened to me and to say that whilst he could offer me no closure, the property was being sold. To this day, I still don't know who that man was, how he got inside, or why Willow hated that locked building so much. But I do know what I saw, and I know what I heard. And sometimes when I walk Willow at night, and she suddenly freezes, ears up, I feel that cold weight in my stomach all over again, like somebody's watching me from behind the tree. So if you ever have a dog like mine, don't ignore their instinct like I did. There's a reason why dogs are man's best friend. Have you ever been so sure you were alone that you ignored your gut instinct, only to realise that someone or something was watching you the whole time? Last year, I agreed to house sit for a family friend while they were out of the country. It was a 5-night stay in a quiet, semi-rural area outside of Rochester, New York. The house was large, a little dated, but in great condition. It sat on a bit of land bordered by trees, quiet, peaceful, and pretty remote. I arrived on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was going down. The owner, Graham, had already left the day before, but he'd left the keys with a neighbour who passed them to me through a small wooden gate. She seemed polite, but a little stiff, like she didn't want to talk. Whatever, I was there to feed the cat, water a few plants, and keep the place from looking empty. The first night was uneventful. I made a frozen pizza, watched a bit of TV, and went to bed about midnight. But around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to a sound. It was subtle at first, just a kind of soft thudding. I got up and rubbed the sleep from my eyes and looked out the window facing the back garden. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the property, right where the grass met the tree line, was a figure, tall and motionless. It looked like a person standing completely still, arms down, head tilted slightly upwards, just staring towards the house. My first thought was that somebody was messing with me, but they didn't move, not even a twitch. My heart started to race. This person was literally standing still, staring me down. What was worse, they just looked very uncanny, like something just wasn't right. I must have stood there watching for a solid 10 minutes. The figure didn't move, not even an inch. I even turned the lights off behind me to try and see more clearly through the glass, but still just the same motionless silhouette. I couldn't shake the unease from my chest. I wasn't about to go out there in the dark, but I also didn't feel comfortable just ignoring it, so I stayed up, watching. My mind went through every explanation as to who they were or what they wanted. I did think about calling the cops, but the more I stared, the more I got the feeling that this wasn't real. Either way, I just couldn't be sure. The next thing I knew, the sun was coming through the blinds and my neck hurt from where I'd fallen asleep on the windowsill. I know, I'm a lousy house sitter. I got up and looked outside again. The figure was still there. Now in daylight I could see it clearly. It wasn't a person, it was a mannequin. A full-sized mannequin, dressed in what looked like a tracksuit and trainers, standing eerily upright at the edge of the tree line that just bordered the property. It gave me the creeps. Who the hell keeps a mannequin like that on their property? After breakfast I walked out there and stood in front of it. It was even worse close up. Its face had no features, just blank, expressionless plastic. and the way it was posed, it didn't look accidental, like somebody had deliberately placed it there to watch the house. I wrestled the thing over my shoulder and carried it back to the garage and stashed it inside. I locked the door behind me. That whole morning felt weird, like I was being watched, even when I was indoors. It was a feeling that I just couldn't shake for the whole day. By late afternoon I put the feeling down, assuming Graham must have placed it as a joke to make me feel uneasy. It worked, but I called him nonetheless and asked him straight out if he knew anything about a mannequin on his property. During the phone call, he sounded genuinely confused, said he had no idea what I was talking about. He'd never owned a mannequin, and no one else should be on the land. I asked if he or his family had ever experienced anything weird in the house. He laughed a bit and said no, but I could hear either unease or confusion in his voice. Whatever, I told myself it was either him or the neighbour's kids trying to prank me. I had 3 nights left and I figured I could just push through. But the next night was way worse. It was early evening and the sun had just left the sky. Its red haze was completely gone. All that was left was an unnerving darkness creeping up the backyard. I was trying to take my mind off things, watching some Netflix in the living room, when I literally jumped out of my seat. I heard this crazy banging sound, like somebody smashing a metal rod against sheet metal, again and again. It was coming from the back, the garage, and for a split second I had the insane thought that it was the mannequin trying to get out. My heart was thumping as I snuck to the kitchen, where there was a window that looked over the back lawn. I wished to God I didn't look. There, standing in the middle of the yard, were 5 mannequins, all dressed in plain grey apparel, all posed upright, all facing the house. I froze. They hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. I'd been watching the garden and had all the doors locked, I know I did, and the garage was locked too, which meant they hadn't come from there. I was staring at these figures trying to make sense of it, and that's when 2 of them moved. It wasn't dramatic, just slow, deliberate steps towards the left and right, each moving towards a separate side of the house. That was all it took. My legs felt weak. I stumbled back from the window shaking, not understanding what was happening. They weren't mannequins, they were people. Before I could think clearly, there came another bang, but this time from the front door. A heavy, solid hit. Someone was trying to get in. Then again, another bang. I snapped out of my daze, adrenaline flowing, and ran upstairs. I locked myself in the guest bedroom and called the cops. I was out of breath trying to explain what I saw, feeling like a lunatic, even saying the words people and mannequin. I stayed upstairs, huddled in the corner of the room, listening. The banging continued, this time from multiple sides. I heard no speech, just the crunching of footsteps, the tapping of glass and the banging of metal. A few moments later, there was utter silence. I held my breath listening, not daring to make a sound. Had somebody got in the house? At that moment there was a huge thumping against the front door. My heart skipped, but thankfully it was followed by a bellowing voice shouting, "Sheriff's office, make yourself known." I practically sprinted downstairs. By the time they searched the property, everything was gone. The mannequins, the banging, nothing was out of place. They looked at me with that polite disbelief you get when you know someone thinks you're losing it. The officer mentioned local kids might be playing pranks. The other told me off the record that if I were him, I'd leave. I didn't need to hear it twice. I called Graham the second the cops left and told him that I was done. I packed my stuff and jumped in my car and drove home. 3 months later, I got a call from Graham. He sounded strange, like he didn't know how to start the conversation, but he eventually explained what had been happening. I wasn't the only one to experience horror at his place. After I left, he tried to get a few other short-term tenants in. Every single one of them bailed after a night or two, reporting the same things. Figures outside the house, mannequins showing up in the yard, and loud banging on the doors at night. One of them had even claimed to have found mannequins inside the house when they woke up. Graham finally decided to set up some cameras and started noticing strange activity late at night, shadows moving across the lawn, cars stopping at odd hours. He eventually hired a private investigator, and after some digging, the truth came out. A neighbour, the same one who gave me the keys, had a personal vendetta against Graham. Apparently there'd been a land dispute years earlier, and she'd never let it go. She and her family had been orchestrating an elaborate campaign to scare off tenants, so that he couldn't make any money off renting the place. They bought mannequins, dressed them up, moved them silently onto the lawn at night, and then used remote noisemakers or even crowbars to bang on the doors and the walls. They even broke into the garage while I was sleeping, which makes my stomach turn. The reason Graham had called me was because he was filing a civil suit against them and asked if I was willing to be a witness. I said yes. I still don't know how they managed to do everything without me hearing more, and I don't know how many nights they were out there watching me whilst I slept in the house unaware. All I know is that I'll never do house sitting again, especially not in the countryside. This happened last winter while I was staying at my aunt's house. She had gone to Florida for a few weeks and asked me to keep an eye on her place. I agreed. I work remotely, so it didn't matter where I stayed. Her house was a bit out of the way, just past town, kind of near the woods with no close neighbours. The first few days were quiet. Snow had been falling non-stop, and I didn't go out much. I spent most of my time working in the kitchen or watching TV in the living room. The snow piled up quickly, and by the second day it had become deep, and that's when things started to feel strange. On Tuesday morning, I woke up at around 7 AM. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and noticed something strange outside through the back window. In the snow, right by the back steps, there were footprints. They weren't mine. They came from the woods behind the house, walked right up to the steps and then just stopped. There were no prints leading away, just a messy circle where somebody had stood for a while. I opened the back door and looked around. The air was still, cold, and there wasn't a sound. No animals, no people. I thought it maybe was a hunter or somebody passing through. It was weird, but I tried not to overthink it. That day was quiet. I worked, kept to myself, and didn't see anything else. I went to bed at around 11 PM, a little nervous but mostly tired. Around 1 AM, I woke up to a noise. It sounded like something hitting the side of the house. A dull thump. I sat up in bed listening. Nothing for a few seconds. Then another bump, closer to the window. I got up and looked through the blinds, but the porch light didn't show anything. Just snow falling in thick waves. I stayed up for a while, but nothing else happened. The next morning, Wednesday, I went outside after breakfast to check again. The footprints from the day before were covered, but now there were new ones. These were on the other side of the house, near the garage. They came right up to one of the side windows, and the window was open. Not all the way, just an inch, enough to let cold air in. I hadn't opened it, I was sure of it. I hadn't even been in that room since I arrived. My skin crawled, I shut it and locked it right away. I checked all the other windows and doors. Most were locked, but one in the living room had its latch slightly undone. I locked it again, this time checking it twice. That night, I was on edge. I left a few lights on and brought a kitchen knife up to my bedroom, just in case. Around 12:30 AM, I heard a noise again, a knock, then a dragging sound, like something scraping the wall outside. I stayed in bed, frozen. I didn't look out the window this time. I was too scared. The sound stopped after a while, and eventually I fell back to sleep. Thursday morning, I found more footprints. This time, they were on the front porch. They led up to the front door and then circled around the windows before disappearing around the side. I looked closely. Some of the steps were deeper than others, like whoever it was had stood in one place for a while again, watching. I also saw that the small window in the laundry room was cracked open, just like the one from the day before. It was one of those high windows you have to really reach to unlock. I never touched it. I closed it tight and locked it. That afternoon I called my aunt and told her what was happening. She told me no one should be around the house, and she had never had issues before. She said maybe I should stay somewhere else. I thought about it, but I didn't want to leave. It felt like giving up. But maybe I should have left, because that night was the worst. I went to bed with every light on in the house. I double-checked all the locks. I even pushed a chair against the front door. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. My heart just wouldn't settle. Around 2 a.m, I heard a sound from the hallway. Not outside, but inside. It was soft, like a door creaking, then a gentle bump like somebody brushing against the wall. I sat up and held my breath. The sound came again. A slow knock on the floorboards, then silence. I grabbed my knife from the nightstand, walked over to the bedroom door and slowly opened it, just to take a peek. The hallway was dark, even with the lights on elsewhere. Everything felt still, like the air itself was holding its breath. I couldn't take it, so I closed the bedroom door, locked it, and called the cops. When they arrived, they checked every room. There was nothing, no one, no broken windows, no open doors. But the back door, its lock was turned halfway. It wasn't open, it was just unlocked. I was sure I had locked it. Again, I didn't sleep, instead I sat in the living room with the lights on facing the door. By morning, the snow had stopped and I went outside again hoping that maybe I'd see something different. But the footprints were back. This time, they circled the entire house, once, twice, and then again. 3 full circles around the house. Tight loops as if the person had been walking around for a long time. They must have seen me sitting in the living room. I looked out at the woods. The trees were quiet, still watching. I never saw anyone. I never heard anyone speak, just sounds, the prints, the open windows and the doors. That was my last day in the house. I packed my things and I left that afternoon. I told my aunt what had happened and she believed me. A few weeks later, she said she installed security cameras, but they never caught anything strange, and she claims she's never had any issues. To this day, I have no idea who it was or what they wanted, and I guess I'll never know.